very, very radical.
Sheila, I'm just trying to coax you on, because I suspect we're talking to a sort of room that converted on that particular issue, although it's good to hear it, clarified. Do you want to make any comment on this? Is this considered a hate crime? And have you got a comment?
Well, I'm not sure.
Tories' tax policies towards marriage.
I mean, I'm not sure if anyone sort of the term hate crime. I sometimes find quite difficult, but I think we have to be careful about people saying I'm not comfortable with this as a way of concealing a discriminatory view, because that's exactly what people used to say, and I think the point about race was well made, because that's exactly what people used to say. They personally weren't comfortable with it, so they should be allowed to be exempted. And I think that's the danger behind that. I think obviously I'm going to say that I don't think the tax proposal...
Can I just stop? I'm sorry I said to stop you a lot, but I'm keen to get some interaction here. Your man still doesn't agree. Come on.
Lindsay, I don't agree. I mean, maybe a better comparison to what I was trying to say was only a few years ago it would have been quite common to have been refused entry to B&B if you're an unmarried couple. That was just the way things were. People just thought it was a bit improper. It's
but there are people who, you said it's an old generation thing. There are people from the old generation who wouldn't want to let a coloured person into their B&B, or they wouldn't want to let someone like my father, who was a Jewish refugee, into their B&B because it made him uncomfortable. And then, who is going to stay in all the B&Bs?
She makes a good point. Bringing colour into it, it's completely absurd. I mean,
how is it different?
No one, I've never met anyone that's uncomfortable with a black person. That's completely ridiculous.
It is, and there are lots of people who...
And then, in that case, it should also be...
Okay.
People should be...
Right, there's an entire article on the BNP, actually, that you should read sometime if you're on here on this.
Hate crime is an interesting point of sort of nuance that gets mixed. I'm an advocate and therefore I'm self-employed, but I've been a prosecutor in sheriff courts on and off for the last 10 years. And when I started, racial discrimination as an aggravation in the law was just new. And it was all a bit odd, because you were getting the classic unthinking racist who would do something violent and horrible to somebody and then call them a rude word whilst doing it. And the Crown Office and the prosecution service were starting to prosecute them for an aggravated breach of the peace or an aggravated assault. And all the lawyers were thinking, well, clearly hurting someone physically is the real crime here. This is just a sort of fluff on the top. But the Crown said, no, you never drop the racial aggravation. You always keep it. That was Crown policy. It's been that for 10 years. And now going back in after a few years away, it's had a change of attitude. Because the unthinking violent racist is actually one of the most insidious things we have to deal with. Because the number of thoughtful, planned violent racists outside is fortunately rather low. And they normally flag themselves up on the road so you can see when you're out and about. But the unthinking violent racist is much more common. And so you really have to be quite firm about them, because they're the ones who actually don't realise they're doing it at a superficial level. So prosecuting them quite hard for hate crime is quite important. I just would say that not serving someone in a B&B, there's always a test about whether you lock someone up and put them in a police cell. There's a difference between violently assaulting someone and racially abusing them, or generally abusing them, or being rude about etc. whilst you're doing it, and not serving them in a business context. They are, I think, different, because one involves violent actions and the other doesn't. But we have to find a way in society of marking our disapproval. So we should take licences away, for example. We should use the other enforcement mechanisms in society, rather than trying to lump everything as hate crime. Otherwise, again, the American problem, there are too many hate crimes in America in a sense. It's become an easy thing to attach. Hate crimes are very bad. And I hate to say this, but I suspect that on the scale of very bad to less bad, inappropriately discriminating against someone in service of a B&B is less bad than a hate crime. But it's still something that we should use the full power of the courts and the regulatory system and the licensing system. We shouldn't be able to get drinks license. We shouldn't be able to get restaurant license. And so I think we just have to, we've come a long way since the law in 28.
Can I just ask you about that? Because the Lib Dems are very big on devolving things to the lowest level, or the most local level. Would you, because those sorts of licensing regulations are usually a council function, would you be enforcing that on councils across Scotland, that they would have to do that?
Well, that's a good point, because you then have a risk that a council decides not to enforce the licensing problem. some of a sufficiently large number of the licences leveled by the sheriff that it's not all the council thing. But no, that's a big issue. You will end up with a problem where in some areas the council doesn't want to enforce something.
That's a problem, particularly for parties who like to have local decision making.
Yeah, but you end up with a
and that's you.
You know, but you end up with a problem at the end of the day about do you want good government or our government? And I was thinking about answering a different question, which will probably come around, but the Liberal Democrats are slightly obsessed by democracy. So that means it would be very hard for a Liberal Democrat to say, just because a council somewhere a long way from Edinburgh, we're not going to name any major island authorities at this point, decides to not implement the law, we should force them to it. But remember, the courts will do it. A good example is the issue of registrars for same-sex partnerships. There was one in the Highlands and one in Islington. They were both treated the same way because we have the Equality Commission. So if a council doesn't do it, the Equality Commission can intervene. But they wouldn't want the government to intervene.
Okay, right, let me intervene.